all people, or whatever you want to call yourselves, we're all here together for one common cause, obviously, to take back America. Amen. Somebody else has it now. We want to take it back, obviously.
Amen.
Great, and of course, we have a special guest today, which we will introduce in a moment. But my name is Art Groveman, and Bob Schulz called me Monday morning, actually, and said, "Can you get some people together up in Clearwater real fast?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Let's take a shot at it and see." And so this is what we have to show for this. The ball game's going on. There's all Gasparilla. There's all kinds of things going on, but this is a lot more important, I'm sure. And so I want to not make this a long presentation, but I found out about Bob Schulz as a result of me driving out to Ames, Iowa, to see what the political process was all about. And I found Bob and Jim Condit and a lot of other people out there trying to get the GOP in Iowa to use paper ballots instead of machines. And I was actually privileged to be right there in the courtroom watching the kangaroo judge in court produce a decision that was really not very logical at all. And so the GOP really had the judge in their back pocket. And it was just amazing how we could not even get the attention of the Supreme Court and the judicial court at that time to use paper ballots. And oddly enough, if you remember the news, the Ames, Iowa did have some computer glitches in their voting process, even though we insisted that the ballot should be paper and totally counted in public in a total transparent process. And so Bob will tell you more about that and other things that he's been involved with. But at first I'd like to introduce Paul, who's the local area meetup coordinator. And Paul will say a few words, and then Paul will introduce the person that will introduce Bob Schulz. So Paul, take it away.
I really feel at home again after Super Tuesday and after the elections here in Florida. Things kind of slowed down a little bit. You guys noticed that a little bit? Yeah. And everybody got a little depressed. Maybe it was just me. I don't know. But yeah, it slowed down a little bit. Anyway, it's good to be around all you Patriots because that's where I feel at home around all my friends. So I really appreciate you all coming. There was only 23 confirmed, so look how many people showed up. That's awesome. We're all here for a common goal, which is obviously to take our country back. We already brought that up. Obviously, ever since the Constitution was written, it's been eroded slowly and slowly and slowly. And after 1913, we really started going south. I joined the revolution, the Ron Paul Revolution, as a lot of you guys did, to make a difference. And this is the phase 2 of the revolution that we're starting. That's what we have to do. And we the people, to me, what I found is the organization that is going to lead it and to really make a big difference in our country. So I'm glad you all are here to get behind that. I'm going to introduce somebody. His name is Alex Petrowski. He's a local businessman. He's a family man. He has 2 kids. He's been with We the People for 7 years. So he has been in this movement longer than I have, as far as, because I started mainly when Ron Paul started. He's established meetings all throughout the state. He's a Southeast Regional Coordinator for We the People. He's promoted freedom and fascism all across the state. In Georgia, excellent guy. He's been involved in this movement for a long time. And he's going to introduce our guest speaker, which is Bob Schulz.
Amen. Thank you.
It's so good to see you all here. It is great. Old faces, new faces. It's good to have you here. I've got the pleasure to introduce a gentleman that I met a few years ago in Washington. I went to one of the rallies, Give Me Liberty conferences, and I sat there in awe saying, man, if I could only be half the man he is. He's trying to do it the right way. Ask questions, expect answers. Ask more questions, expect more answers. He's been a lone voice in the wilderness, and it's good to see that we're all here to support him. He's an engineer by trade, retired a few years back, saw what was going on in New York State. My heart goes out to him because he started something called, correct me if I'm wrong, it's called the Taxpayers Association of New York State. And this man actually drove around every county in New York trying to get taxpayers together to work together. And through that and different events in his life, it's brought him here today. Now he's got somebody with him that I really think is the brains behind the whole operation. Mr. Schulz, would you wave your bride in here for a quick second? This is the brains behind the operation. his childhood sweetheart. They've been together since day one. I mean, isn't that neat? Talk about commitment. So I want to thank you, Judy, for letting Bob come up here today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today, Bob Schulz from Albany. Come on, let's stand up. Well, I wanted real quick, the group here in Florida, we said we need to have some kind of identification so when we went places, they would know who we are. We chose the color purple. Some people said red, some people said white, some people said blue, some people said black. But purple's the color of royalty and knowledge. So what we did is we took the We the People logo off the website, and we put on the shirt that says We the People. So Bob, I'd like to give one to you and one to Judy, okay?
Thank you very much.
The large one's for Bob, the medium for Judy.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This was very short notice. What Art sort of left out of his introduction, when I called him last Monday, it was because of what happened on Sunday, yesterday.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Someone has dogs in a car parked outside. Anyone in this room? B48 OVW or B908CJ. Anyone here? The dogs are barking and... Sorry.
Okay.
They want to come to the meeting.
So what happened last Sunday, which prompted the call to Art, happened in the Colonial Inn in Concord, Massachusetts. Those of you who are familiar with the Colonial Inn, it was built in 1716, and the restaurant that is there now, they sort of brought a few buildings together. But the restaurant was a munitions center where the colonialists stored their munitions in that area. And the word came that the British were coming to get the munitions. And people put their farm implements down and blacksmith implements and whatever. And they went to meet the British at the North Bridge, which is very close to the Colonial Inn. So that's where the first shots were fired. So we've been there before, and it's got a lot of history to it. It's where Thoreau, Weldon Pond is nearby, and so on. But what happened there on last Sunday is this. A fellow named Bob Dwyer, very much a figure in the Ron Paul grassroots movement in Massachusetts. He was the person who thought up the Boston Tea Party event and implemented it. He and others from the Ron Paul movement responded to a call for observers to observe the counters who were counting the ballots in the New Hampshire recount. Some of you may not know, but following the primary, Dennis Kucinich, the Democratic candidate, asked for a recount, and a fellow named Albert Howard asked for a recount. Albert Howard was on the ballot along with 20 other people on the Republican ballot for president. He was from Michigan, and he asked for a statewide recount. And so the recount was getting underway, and Kucinich pulled out after 40% of his Democrat ballots were counted. And Albert Howard stayed with it, and people from around the country contributed to came up with the $60,000 required for the Republican recount. 24 cents a ballot is the way they figured it. But in any event, Bob Dwyer and other Ron Paul people from the grassroots movement were participating in the recount, and I was there sort of because I developed an interest in the whole issue of machines counting votes and what that the dangers, the constitutionality of that issue. So I was there supervising the recount, paying very much attention and documenting what was happening. But when the recount was over, yes.
Pull your microphone a little closer.
Okay, this is not a mic for the room. This is a
Oh,
mic for the
okay.
equipment here. We did request, can you hear me in the back okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll speak up. But Bob Dwyer and other people from the Ron Paul movement responded because Albert, during a recount in this recount room, which was at the archive building in Concord, New Hampshire, the way they do this, they had 8 tables, and the ballots would come in boxes from the precincts. It's a centralized recount, as opposed to a decentralized recount where the recounting goes on at the precincts. So the ballots come in, and they were being taken out of boxes and would be counted on one of 8 tables. And the counters were people employed by the state, and the candidates get to put observers on the other side of the table. They can't touch the ballots, they can watch what's happening. And so Albert didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, God bless his soul. He did this, and people responded, raised the money, and helped him out with his hotel bill, and we got the job done. But he needed observers, at least one on the other side of the table from the state people counting the ballots. And so the Ron Paul people and the We the People responded, and we had plenty of observers for the job. But Bob Dwyer was one of those, and a woman named Carol Sharp, quite an organizer of the Ron Paul groups in Massachusetts. So in any event, after the recount, we were at a dinner, and I found myself with a few of these Ron Paul grassroots folks, and they were deflated, they were depressed, because Ron was not doing well in the primaries. And Bob Dwyer was very depressed. He said, I'm going to move to the woods and stock up with my provisions and let the world go to hell. But I talked about the right to petition and a few other things, and right there in front of me, this man just turned around. And he says, you know, we have to talk to people about this. And he said, I'm going to get the Colonial in, and if I put the word out and we get to the network, the Ron Paul network, could you come and talk to us about this? And so that happened last Sunday. And I gave this presentation and said to the people, is this a message that we need to take out on the road and talk to other people about? You tell me. That's why I'm here, is to see if you're getting, as a group, as excited as Bob Dwyer got in the restaurant when we were just talking to him over dinner. Well, they just stood up. All of them stood up and cheered. We had 85 people there and 85 chairs, and then there was standing room only. And so I said, fine, we're going to do that. And so I called Art. I had been working with Art on the NCEL, the National Clean Election Lawsuit. And I knew of his involvement in the Ron Paul grassroots movement down here. And I said, these people shouldn't be depressed. They shouldn't be deflated. You know, we have to take these issues, Ron Paul's issues, our issues, we have to take these to the next level. There's a way to do that. We have to keep this momentum going. So Art put the call out, and this is the result, and I thank you for that. But the word is getting around now, and people want this presentation, want me to go talk with them, and these requests are now coming in from all over the country. So I'm going to do that. So I do have this issue. There are people in this room who are We the People, who have been following what we've been doing over the years and who know my story, why it is or how it is I got to be standing here today doing this kind of work. And they may not want to hear this again because they've heard it once or twice. But then on the way in, I was asked to spend some time on this. And it is part of this presentation. So we'll start with that. My background, my education, and that sort of thing. And then we'll get into some of the issues. And then there is a plan here. We'll finish up by talking about a plan that I think the people should get behind and make happen in order to restore the Constitution and save the country. So with that, we'll just go through this PowerPoint. This PowerPoint presentation, by the way, we'll make it available so that anybody can download it. Art is going to put it up on his website. It'll be on our website. Anybody can take this PowerPoint and show this story anywhere they'd like to. We do not copyright anything on our website. So with that, let's begin here. I guess we can talk about this as phase 2 of the revolution. And so I am the presenter. Art was to have taken us through that. Okay, personally, my personal background, I'm 68. That is my wife. We did meet when we were 13. And we have 4 kids, 9 grandkids. And some 40 years ago, I bought some land and a small farm, and we built a home and have been there ever since. It's on the east side of just a wonderful lake at the foothills of the Adirondacks in upstate New York. And in my first career, I was doing quite well. I was breeding thoroughbred horses and racing them at tracks around the country. It was just an interesting life. But my education, I graduated high school and joined the Air Force, and I was trained as a flight facilities equipment repairman. But I got an honorable discharge and an appointment to one of the 5 federal academies, the Maritime Academy at Kings Point, New York, on Long Island, with an engineering degree. Picked up a master's in business, marketing, finance at Xavier. And then I took completed just about all of the coursework required for a PhD in public administration at the Graduate School of Public Affairs in Albany, New York. And I sort of had 2 careers. The first career, about 25 years, I graduated Kings Point in '63 and went to work for Westinghouse in East Pittsburgh and then the Pan Am building in New York City. But they moved that division to Sunnyvale, California. I didn't want to go there, so I joined GE in Schenectady as an engineer in their gas turbine department. And I was there when I received a call, as all recent graduates from the academy had received a call to help out in the sea lift of all of these supplies and ammunition and men and so forth over to Vietnam. If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have said no thank you. But I spent a year, 2 trips, long trips over there, and one to Guantanamo Bay. Because of some work, I came back and I joined the Corporate Research and Development Center of the General Electric Company in Niskayuna, Schenectady, New York. And based on some work I was doing there, caught the attention of the Republican administration in Connecticut, particularly a guy named Dan Lufkin. Dan was one of the 3 people that formed Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenneret, a very prominent, successful Wall Street firm. But by the time he was 40 or 41, he was phasing out of Wall Street, one of the founders of Earth Day, and was turning his attention more to social issues, moving away from Wall Street. But he heard about the work I was doing, which caught the attention of the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times, and asked if I would go over to Connecticut and start up a state agency and write some law and so forth to get them on that path. So I agreed to do that. I kept my home in upstate New York and traveled to Hartford and back every weekend for 3 years. But I also, after that, I was asked by the Democrat governor of New York, Hugh Carey, if I would accept a gubernatorial appointment to head up a policy office in New York to sort of get New York's laws in that on the books and get New York headed in the direction that I thought they should go in this particular field. And then I became a full-time advisor under contract to the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency during the Carter years. And then with Prudential Bache Securities, a 4-year joint venture between my consulting company and them. I didn't want to go to New York City, and I had a group of people working for me, and so we had a joint venture. I actually took a 3-year employment contract with a technology-based company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Power Recovery Systems. And I was the founder and CEO of a management consulting company. So that was my first career. And I was just oblivious to things governmental. You know, I'd always felt that government was always benevolent, always had the public interest uppermost in its mind, and that these were the white hats. And with the exception of somebody who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, you know, you could really trust these guys. And but something happened, and I started my second career, which brings me here. It didn't. The first one didn't just end, and the second one began. There was a 9-year transition. So in the second career, though, has been full-time since for the past 20 years. And I don't know what you call it, except I'm a freedom keeper. That's all I can call it, and we'll see why. So in the first, this is the transition period here until '88, but something happened in my neck of the woods, based entirely on what government was telling the people in this rural part of upstate New York that has, in Lake George, it's a tourist area, but it's a 32-mile long lake that's crystal clean, and even today people, you know, they have their pipes from their lakeside homes and they bring the water directly into their homes. There are no restrictions, and this water, the lake is recharged with a lot of groundwater, and it flows north and dumps into Lake Champlain. But government was telling the people back in the 70s, late 70s, that this lake was, in their words, was going to turn pea soup green in 6 to 10 years. And because everybody's on-site wastewater disposal systems in this watershed were contaminating the groundwater in this lake. And if the lake dried up or eutrophied, it would, people's home, tourism would disappear, and the value of people's homes would disappear, and it just frightened everybody. So they had a county-wide referendum to approve this project, to sewer both sides of this lake, bring the sewer line together, and run it down a state highway out of that watershed over the ridge to the Hudson River, where they would build a new sewage treatment plant and dump the effluent into the Hudson River. So in '79, this new career of mine started in a little firehouse just around the bend from where my home is. This county commissioner, this new county official, was going to be speaking on this new project. And so Judy brought it to my attention. I wasn't really reading the local newspaper. My work and interests were in Albany and Washington and around the country. But in any event, she talked me into going to listen to this county official. And at the end of his presentation on this project, I had a couple of questions. I mean, this is sort of my field, but I had a couple of questions. So I raised my hand. And he said, "No questions. If you have a question, see me later." And I instinctively, I don't know why, but I instinctively felt there's something wrong with that. I mean, why would this government official not answer I wanted people to hear my question, and I wanted them to hear his answer. So I whispered to Judy, we're leaving, because I wanted to get home and get on the phone and start talking to people and start looking into this. I instinctively felt there's something wrong there. And she said, "Not without my covered dish." And we got the dish, and we went home, and I got on the phone and started calling people who had lived around the lake longer than I had, asking if there was any algae along the shore, if anybody was getting sick or had rashes or whatever. No. I said, well, what is going on here? Why do we need this hugely expensive project that's going to just cause more environmental harm? I knew, because this was my field. It's going to cause more environmental harm than its solution. So I looked into this, and what I discovered was the people who owned the tourist attractions at the head of the lake, annually there was a bill, always before the state legislature, for casino gambling in New York. And there were people at the head of the lake that owned these tourist attractions that wanted casino gambling in the village of Lake George. Well, there's no way you can bring, all of those people in unless you can manage their wastewater, and what better way to do it than to ship it to the Hudson River and dump it in there? Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, we'll fan out, we'll have everybody hooked in and charge them a fee, and we'll do that. Well, how are you going to get them to do that? We'll tell them to kill in the lake, and that's what they did. And so I now had 30 questions, and I went to the town, found out where the town board met. I'd never been there. I didn't pay attention to things governmental locally. So I went to the town board meeting, and I was just so naive back then. I really thought you asked these elected officials questions and they answer them. And so at the public comment period of the local meeting, I took the microphone and started asking my questions. And they're sitting there, they're in the paper, whatever they do, but they're clearly not interested. Weren't happy that I was there, and they're not going to answer any questions. But I was determined, got to get these questions answered. So I said, okay, I've got to take them to court because they're violating the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which had been on the books for 2 years back then. Gone were the days that we could just do whatever we want to do. You've got to think about these alternatives, and you've got to quantify the impacts, and you've got to compare the totality of the impacts and choose the alternative. Even if it's the no action alternative, you have to choose the alternative that's going to result in the least adverse impact on the environment. Well, they weren't going to do that. They said, oh, this is an environmental project. We don't have to bother with that. It's going to clean up the lake. Well, I knew differently. I knew it was going to harm the lake. So I never had an attorney, never been in a courtroom, but I interviewed. My office was in Albany, and we interviewed a young fellow down there, and we retained him. He did the legal work, and I did the technical work. And we prevailed 3 years later. The case went to the state Supreme Court Justice where we live, and very powerful person because of the low population density. It's one judge and everything goes through him, so he's very powerful. And he promptly dismissed the case. So we appealed it to the next level and got half a loaf, half a victory. They said before that project can go any further, you've got to do this environmental review. That's what the law is. Well, I knew the law meant more than what that court was saying. I knew that they should never have brought the people to the polls without doing that work first. So the people had the information before them to vote intelligently. And also that the county and town board members should never have voted on this without that information. Approving and financing this project without this information was dead wrong. So we asked the High Court to hear it. It's kind of like the Supreme Court in New York. They don't hear everything. You have to ask them. And then they decide. Well, they decided to hear the case. And in 1982, in a very robust decision, they undid the results of the countywide referendum. They had brought the people to the polls, and they approved it overwhelmingly based entirely on what the government was telling them. So they nullified that resolution and the results of that vote. But they also nullified the resolutions passed by all the town and county board members in approving and financing the project. But that changed my life. I mean, there I learned firsthand that government is not above manufacturing a crisis and concocting and prescribing a solution that is going to benefit a few of them and their friends, but at everybody else's expense. It changed my whole notion of government. And I figured we didn't have a monopoly on this kind of corruption where I live. I mean, this must be going on elsewhere. And so I took it on began to feel responsible to be better informed about not only my rights, but better informed about what government is doing and prepared to confront them when they're doing something wrong. And I also began to feel that it was important to get other people to do the same thing. So we did that, and then that's the Tri-County Taxpayers Association. I did form a local taxpayer group with the idea, just instinctively felt it's very difficult for individuals to prevail, that you need other people to be with you. It makes a difference. And so I instinctively felt we should form a little Tri-County Taxpayers Association, which we did. And the case that was decided is the Tri-County Taxpayers Association versus the town of Queensbury. All right, so for the next 5 years or so, there was stepped up vigilance on my part and the part of other people in my part of the state. And we petitioned the judiciary several times when we started scrutinizing government's behavior, comparing its behavior with the requirements of the law, and then confronting them when we felt that they were doing something they had no right to be doing. And in 1988, I learned another thing firsthand about the government. They retaliate. That they have a retribution, that they will hurt you simply because they don't like you. Let me explain.